So I want to shift to studying evolution and Darwin's theory of evolution. Where do I have this? Share screen. In Jupyter Ed, I just put recently, you don't have to get it, but you're going to want to refer to it. Here's our class list. Let's see. No, here's student Holly RJ. I'm not doing well. I'm failing. I haven't turned in all my assignments. But if you go in here under materials, and then you find biology class, there's this PDF, and it's the evolution study guide. We're going to spend about the next close to a week on evolution. This has notes. It's 2 pages. It's a summary of everything that I want you to know by the time we're done and to understand. We'll come back to it in a second. The new share. So in studying evolution, first off, this man is Charles Darwin. He was an Englishman who lived in the 1800s. His grandfather was a priest, a preacher in the Anglican Church. His dad, I think, was a businessman. He went to school to study preaching. Here, I'm going to try muting everybody for a second here because of the feedback. Who's got the feedback problem? Well, maybe it got better. Thank you. So Charles Darwin, you've all heard of, I'm sure, in regard to evolution. Wait, I've got feedback. Anybody know where mute everybody is on here? No.
You go to participants and then you press the mute button thing.
Yeah. Have you run your own? How do you know that?
I've done a couple Zoom meetings.
Did you ask me a question before?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. But
Okay. I
yeah.
asked you if you saw Balenci's yard sign.
Yeah, she did. She loved it. She was very.
And it had her name on it.
Yeah.
It was great. A lot of schools haven't done that. That was a really nice touch.
No, yeah, it's just like the ones I've seen, they just say the school name, like graduate 2020 or graduate, the class 2020.
That's what the Avalon signs will look like. They'll just be the name or just the school name. So Charles Darwin here, he went to college to study for the priesthood, and then he ended up switching to studying science. And he was quite young. Right after he got out of college in 1831, he needed a job. Does anybody know what job he got for his first job? No, he got on a boat and set sail for a trip around the world. Let me see if I can find, hold on a second, where's the map? That's baby George. Okay, here we go. So Darwin in 1831 got on a boat here in England and took off on a 5-year journey, circumnavigating the globe on a ship that was exploring and
Mr. Holly?
collecting. Yes.
I can't see the map. I only see like.
Yeah, I'm not seeing a map either.
Yeah, I'm not seeing.
I got bad screen share going on then. Hold on. All right, I can see all of you now. Go back to screen share. How about now? Anything?
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you. So he left England here, right after he got out of college. He was in his early 20s in 1831. He didn't get home for 5 years. So this boat was paid basically to go exploring. They were looking for new trading routes for boats to follow. They were looking for new populations of people to trade with. They were looking for new resources that people could use. And so the United States was founded in 1776, so our colony was still going. England had a pretty good understanding of how things worked in North America, at least on the East Coast, but they didn't understand very well South America, Africa, places like that. So on his departure trip, he went down, followed the currents to the west coast of South America, and then they sailed all the way down around the bottom of Cape Horn here, back up Chile, which is all the way along this side, and then over to the Galapagos Islands, which are famous and associated with Darwin. Then he left and went to across the Pacific to Australia, stopped at some islands, then went up through the Indian Ocean to Africa, and he was hired on as sheep naturalist. So there was a painter who was on the ship for a year, and the painter, actually they started to run out of money, so they fired the painter, left him somewhere, but Darwin got to stay, and the job of ship naturalist was to study and to collect and try to understand things that people had never seen before back in England. Many people had curiosity cabinets then, would be like a china cabinet, which they also had, but inside of it in your living room, especially if you had some money, you would keep specimens of things from around the world. So my son Alec, he is a curiosity cabinet kind of kid. So he has shoe boxes in his closet from when he was younger, and he would collect rocks, coins, pieces of electronics, birds' nests, dried up worms. So he would keep all these things that he thought were neat and unusual, and many of them were organic, formerly living things. He had bug collections that he made in natural history camp and things like that. So people had these, so Darwin, people were curious about the world outside England and Europe, and they wanted to collect specimens. So he was shipping things back to study later during his journey from various ports where the ship landed. He was drawing pictures as he went. He was exploring. He actually spent only 18 months on the ship. And apparently he got pretty seasick. He didn't like being on the ship, but the ship would stop for long periods of time, and he would stay and go on months-long explorations of islands or hikes up into the mountains. So 3.5 years wandering around. Let me see if I can start a new share here. This is a picture. Can you see this? Izzy, give me a thumbs up if you can see a ship. No? All right. So apparently.
Wait, is it on the far right?
No. Oh, you mean on the, I know you shouldn't be able to see the map. Here, let me stop the
No.
share.
It's
I
really
saw it. It was
small.
just
was
small
really
and it was on the
small.
far
I
right.
saw that it was small. It was like in the bottom right corner.
Okay, how about that?
It hasn't started yet. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the ship. That's in Patagonia, down at the very bottom of South America, in Chile. They stopped on a sandbar, and you can see they were shoring the ship up here. They basically parked it for a while so that they could go exploring in Patagonia. The tide went out and grounded the ship, and they kept it here for some time. So that's the HMS Beagle. HMS stands for Her Majesty's Ship. It was a private expedition but the ship had this public name, like it was a government ship. All right. Somebody's got a little feedback. Somebody just come back in. Thank you. Let me try to get the next one here. What Darwin did a lot of while he was traveling was draw. So here are pictures that Darwin made during his journey of beetles.
Holly,
Yes.
it's the same thing where we can see like your documents and we can see a small image on the right.
Oh, this is killing me. All right, let me try. Let me close that. So maybe I need to. Anything now?
Same thing.
Same thing.
Always the same thing. Let's see. Do I have to stop the share in between every one, maybe? Give me 1 second. Let me drag these photos out of here. If I open it like that. And back to my Zoom. New share. That didn't work.
Mr. Hawley, what if you double click on the image so it becomes bigger? Sometimes I do that.
Yeah, I could just do that. Why some of these are working and some aren't. Right, the box is green. It's still small for you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Here, I'm gonna grab all these. I'm gonna drag them out. I'm gonna drop them on my desktop. Then I'll go hunting around for them. Paste. Paste the file in the destination. New share. Maybe this is what we need to do. I share the screen. Can you see the whole screen now?
We can see your computer, like your computer screen with all the documents.
There we go. This is gonna work better, I think. There. Winner, winner, chicken dinner, Izzy. Thank you. So Darwin was a very good artist. So these were stag type beetles that he saw in his journeys. There's Darwin. Let me see if I can find his drawing of birds. Darwin's finches are, click through these quickly and then come back. Baby George, the map, the ship. Oh, so here are drawings that Darwin made of finches. As part of his journey, he ended up with a lot of dead things, including finches. As I said, he was shipping these things back all the time so he could study them later. Tons, I think, of animal specimens, ostriches and rheas, fish and fossils that he found. He drew them, he studied them, he made notes on them. He spent his time at night when he couldn't explore, drawing these pictures and on the ship.
Mr. Hawley,
Yes.
for me, it's very zoomed in.
Zoomed in?
Yeah, it's like very zoomed in for me, so I can only see like a few ending words.
Do you see a picture of beetles right now?
It's white.
Bugs?
No.
No. It might be because I'm moving too quickly. I might need to abandon the photo plan.
The screen looks fine for me.
Does it? So can you see rocks right now with the birds?
Yeah.
I see the full
can see it.
picture.
Yeah,
it
me
sound-
too.
It looks good.
Sorry,
Nadia.
Nadia, maybe you need to drop out and come back.
Or maybe you should use the computer instead. And
She
So-
probably just has slow internet.
Mhm.
Could be internet. So these
Yeah, I
These
think
pictures-
it's just my internet.
I had a chance last summer that my family and my brother's family and my dad all made a trip to the Galapagos.
Wow.
And it was, so these are pictures that I took on that trip. And these are birds, which are called blue-footed boobies. And they're used as evidence for evolution, like many of the things in the Galapagos, because one doesn't find them anywhere else. But somehow these birds developed a gene that causes them to have these blue feet. Let's see. Oh, I have to make it smaller, I think, and then see all photos. There's not what we want. This is technologically my lamest class yet. Right. Oh, shit.
What do the blue feet help them with?
It's not clear. So there are things that are not obvious advantages for organisms that we find. Here, maybe I need to just close the photo. Here's the family. This has baby George. I don't know if people can see that, but there was a movie, Master and Commander, which had a ship's naturalist. A few years ago, students oftentimes had seen it. This is the bay from Master and Commander that they used to park the ship in, I guess. This is a volcano that we passed by, that we looked into in order to see flamingos that hung out there, and they're special Galapagos flamingos. So one of the things we're going to talk about are the iguanas that Darwin looked at. So Christina, can you see this picture of an iguana? Thank you. So different iguanas evolved. Iguanas evolved differently based on where they lived and what they did, and based on the island where they were. So this is a marine iguana.
You just have to unplug those two light things on it, and that's it.
I hear Frankie's sister.
Oops.
So this iguana has large claws on its feet. It was adapted to survive waves and hold on to rocks because it eats shellfish. Other iguanas don't have these claws and don't swim or hold on to rocks. They climb trees and eat fruit, and their claws are different. And others scurry along the ground looking for things. There's baby George on the boat.
Wait, what about the crab? What was it?
The crab in that picture. So the crabs were used as evidence for evolution. I was hoping to enlarge it, but I couldn't, to show you the crab. This is a slide I found this morning that's super helpful. So one of the things we're going to talk about are the finches. And in fact, these finches are called Darwin's finches because he studied them. He went around to the different islands and he found all these birds that should have been closely related that couldn't mate with each other, which is part of the definition of what a species is. And he theorized that it was too far for a bird to fly to the Galapagos from the mainland. So instead, somehow these birds ended up on a log and traveled to the Galapagos and then started mating and started spreading out to different islands. And based on whatever island they ended up on over the course of thousands of years, they changed, and their beaks here are the key difference. So some of them have tiny beaks that are used for eating small seeds. Some of them have sort of generalized beaks like this one, good for eating fruit and seeds. Some of them have very large, heavy beaks for cracking nuts and things like that. So Darwin's finches are one of the key specimens in the study of the theory of evolution. And in fact, people still study them, and they have become evidence for different types of evolution, especially microevolution. How do I close that? Close that. So on the evolution study guide here, what are we doing? Number one, evolution is a change in a species over time. So that means not in your generation. So change to a species during its lifetime would never count as evolution. Macroevolutions versus microevolution are, well, what's macro mean, Anna, versus micro? Anna looks confused.
Isn't micro small?
Yes, very good. So
Macro large?
Yeah, macro is big. So if you go to school to study economics, there's a course in microeconomics, which is how to run a business. And then there's a course in macroeconomics, which is more how to run a country, how do businesses work together with each other in different industries and things. So microevolution would be small changes in a species over time. Macroevolution would be big changes. So if monkeys become people, that's macroevolution. Takes a long period of time and is a significant change. In microevolution, if the finch's beaks get thicker because there's a drought one year and there's no good fruit to eat, and they have to crack the hard nuts that they find on the ground from the previous year, and then thin-beaked finches end up dying because they can't crack the nuts, then that changes the gene pool for the finches on that island, and we would call that microevolution. So people are still studying that on the islands in the Galapagos, and they're finding that there are tiny changes in the thickness of beaks based on the weather over a period of a few years, right? Droughts versus rainy years. So evolution, macroevolution, microevolution. Adaptation is another really important word here. That's an inherited characteristic that improves an organism's ability to survive and reproduce. Now, this man down here, Lamarck, he came up with the theory of evolution before Darwin. So in fact, he published his theory the year Darwin was born in 1809. And Lamarck should have gotten credit for the whole theory of evolution. Other people after him started working on this idea, and they said, yes, maybe things do change. But Lamarck made a key mistake. He thought that inherited characteristics were acquired during an organism's lifetime. So if we change something about ourselves, that our offspring will inherit that change, right? So if you stretch your neck out every day using a series of rings until you have a much longer neck, that your children would be long-necked people. But we know that's not the case now because reproductive cells, gametes, sperms and eggs, aren't affected. So he made a critical error. He thought that giraffes got long necks from reaching up to get fruits from trees. So that there was a change in the giraffe's environment, and that then they stretched, and the ones who could stretch their necks the most passed that trait on to their offspring because they survived and were able to eat. The So those are, we're talking about adaptations, inherited characteristics. And so Darwin didn't invent the idea of evolution, and he didn't invent the idea of adaptation. What he did figure out was that a species changes because the environment that the species in selects certain adaptations as favorable. So it could be the thickness of the beak. Now, Isha asked about the blue-footed booby a few minutes ago. What's the advantage of blue feet? So there's not necessarily an advantage to all changes in an organism. And in fact, most changes are bad for organisms and don't make them more suitable to survive. A lot of them lead to diseases. But every once in a while, you get one that's a big step forward. So for us, the opposable thumb, right? We are the only species with, I think, a truly opposable thumb, which gives us the ability to do things like hold tools and pens and use them. Everybody else has fingers, right? Even chimpanzees, in a way that they can't do that. We have all sorts of adaptations. We have some things that we think are no longer useful. Let's see. Well, people say that the small toe is not useful anymore to people because of how they walk. And the pinky is not considered a useful adaptation anymore. We have inside of us organs. The gallbladder is still useful. We can survive without it. The spleen, people thought was useless, but turns out to be involved in the immune system. But we find there is a structure in the intestine that nobody knows what it does, and we assume that it's a no longer needed adaptation. Let's see, he's getting 138 now. So Darwin, on his journey on the Beagle, came up with two basic ideas. One was descent with modification, the idea that things alive today resulted from ancient organisms changing over time. One of the things he did was, when he was in Chile, he hiked way up into the Andes mountains. And when he got to the top of the mountains, he started digging and knocking rocks around, and he found fossils of sea creatures. And he thought, why would sea creatures live on top of mountains? That doesn't make any sense. The oceans are so far below. And then later on, he was still in Chile. I think he was near Valparaiso, and there was an enormous earthquake. It wiped out most of the city. And he went through the city about a week after the rubble. So he had been there in another part of Chile when the earthquake occurred. And he saw that the land was lifted up in a lot of places. Let me see, let me stop the share.
Wait, Mr. Holly,
Uh-huh.
would European lice, like, you know how they've altered so it's harder to kill, would that be like a micro, like, yeah, like the mini change of, or?
Yeah, so pesticide resistance, that sort of thing in bugs can be a micro change that can happen pretty quickly. Bacterial resistance to antibiotics can happen in a generation based on what kind of environment they're in. So Darwin, back to Darwin, he's on top of the mountains, and then he goes down and he sees these sea creatures way up high, and he starts to understand, well, maybe the earth changed. And then he finds over time, which was still, right, that was a pretty new idea that there wasn't a lot of evidence for, even in the 1850s. The sea creatures also, he found some that look like organisms that are alive today, but different. And then he found some fossils that are no longer around. And he thought, where did these organisms go? How's Jafia doing? She's dying. Is there a chat going on, Jafia? You're fun to watch. He found fossilized organisms that don't exist anymore. You can buy some of them in malls or online now, like trilobites. Trilobites were sort of ocean cockroaches. Some were a foot wide and some were just an inch or two. And we have fossilized remains for them. They're kind of everywhere. But none of them live today. And Darwin started to think during his journey, where did these things go? What happened to them, right? There wasn't the idea of extinction when he first started traveling. And in fact, the idea that the earth was old was pretty new. A lot of science in Europe was based on, was done by people who believed in Christianity and the Old Testament, well, and Judaism too. The Old Testament and the New Testament didn't call for a really old earth, right? People were around right at the beginning. And so there are still some people who think that the earth is 5,000 or 10,000 years old. And they argue that some stuff like dinosaurs are made up. There's a museum devoted to this anti-evolutionary theory museum, and it's pretty popular. Evolutionary theory is attacked lots of places. There are still lawsuits going on in the United States now over how evolution is taught in schools. And there were lawsuits. There was a lawsuit that made it to the Supreme Court years ago in whether or not evolution should even be taught in schools. And evolutionary theory is often accused of trying to replace God, right, as the creator, designer of the universe, and as somebody who's actively involved in the universe. The Catholic Church got out ahead of this pretty early with some popes in the late 1800s who said evolutionary theory, right, makes sense in many ways, right? We believe in the Catholic Church in faith and reason, using human reason to understand the world. The evolutionary theory in the encyclicals that I've read, though, talks about how at some point after monkeys became human beings, God would have infused the soul, right? So the teaching is that animals don't have souls, but that human beings do have immortal souls, and that those were placed in, right, to people by God, right? And that's where the story of Genesis occurs with the creation of man and woman. Darwin ran into these problems when he wasn't a particularly religious man by the time he was doing all this scientific research, but he knew that his ideas would change society, and they have. And his book on the origin of species, he wrote it a few years after he got back from the Galapagos, but he didn't publish it. He shared it with a few friends, and they all corresponded about the fact that this book would be used by people to undermine the Christian faith in a God. So he didn't publish the book. And in fact, he sat on the book for, I think it was almost 40 years, right? And then somebody else published the theory. They sent him a copy of their book and said, hey, I had this idea. It's about evolution by means of natural selection and how organisms change over time through generations based on their environment. And at that point, Darwin then published his own book immediately because he didn't want to lose the race to be the first one to publish this and to get his name associated with it, I think. But he knew that this was going to be a problem for lots of people for a long time. And still in the year 2020, right, here in the United States, it's a problem for people 170 years later. All right, that's what I have for you today. I'm sorry about the technological problems. Any questions? Isha?
Yeah, so like when I go to museums and stuff, especially like one of I guess culture and stuff like that, they have like where like for example for me, I'm Indian. So they have like exactly what animal like did I come or evolve from? And I guess in a sense it makes sense, but what are there like for anti-evolution, like people who don't believe evolution is a thing, what do they believe in when they have like strong evidence that, you know, that we come from or like similarities to this animal?
I mean, they stick with the biblical interpretation, many of them. I think part of the problem with evolutionary theory, though, is that the evidence is scarce, and there are lots of leaps that have to be made. So I remember reading recently in a trustworthy source that all the fossils of ancient hominoids, human-like creatures, like the things that we think were between chimpanzees and orangutans and us, right, would fit in the back of a small pickup truck, right? Every piece of evidence we have. And oftentimes what we have is something like a single bone. And then we study that bone and we draw conclusions from it, and make assumptions that are easy to poke holes in. So the most famous fossil of an early hominoid is Lucy, found in Africa by the Leakey family. And Lucy was Australopithecus afarensis, right? It's an early human coming out of Africa, where from an evolutionary perspective, we think life originated in Central Africa and then radiated out around the world. But Lucy, we have like 25% of Lucy's bones and not a full set of leg bones, but we've concluded from studying them that Lucy walked upright, right? And then there were found in that same part of Africa footprints in the mud that were carbon dated to about the time Lucy would have been alive. And they're very famous because they show basically something with an orangutan chimpanzee foot, but not walking on all fours. And there's a older one or a bigger one and a smaller one. So we've deduced from that it was a parent and a child, and they were walking together. One could imagine them holding hands through this mud, and then this mud happened to get fossilized over time and preserve the footprints. But there are a lot of assumptions made, and this assumptions get changed. Like the tree of human inheritance has been redrawn a number of times in my life, right? And whether or not things like Neanderthals are in our genetic line, right? So genetics has changed a lot of this, the DNA work. But there's all these different offshoots of humans that we see when we dig in the fossil record. And some of them are dead ends, right? Some of them like intermingled and made new species. Some of their genes, we think when we look at it, are still in us. So Isha, this is a long way of saying there's a lot of space to poke holes. I mean, if you think about dinosaurs, right? They've changed the pictures of most of the dinosaurs from when I was a kid, right? They don't look the same at all. Because with dinosaur bones, right, you never get the dinosaur. You get a handful of bones, usually mangled. I think there's an Archaeopteryx that we have, like this bird that we have almost a complete skeleton of. But you get a few bones and then you build a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and then you find some more bones and you change the way the Tyrannosaurus Rex looks in the museums. And then, you know, does it have skin? Well, what does the skin look like? So microevolution is much easier, right? You can go study animals, you can study bacteria, you can see how they change, you can document it, you can see that there is an evolutionary effect. Macroevolution is harder, especially when you make a new species for people to understand or to make the argument for. But there's always more and more evidence as we go along. And during your lifetimes, right, some of the thinking will probably change. I think the basic theory is a good one, but you will see changes in it in your life. I went to a lecture once by a man who thought the earth was 10,000 years old, and there were about 50 people there. This is in Montgomery County here, who agreed with him entirely, right? That there's no way the earth is more than 10,000 years old. right? We now think it's a lot older than that. But the age of the Earth has changed since I was in high school. It got twice as old, right, over the intervening years. So science proceeding by fits and starts. All right, I'm happy to stay and talk if anybody wants to. Baby George needs his room back soon to go to sleep, but you're welcome to drop out. It's always wonderful to see you guys, even those I can't see down there in the corner. Elise and Lucia went away, and Benedetta and Molly and Lily and Becky and Grace.